Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 8, Say Cheese. While preparation for the standardized test was something new for the fourth graders, many of their other activities were exactly like those of years past. There was the annual police department assembly program about bicycle safety. The format changed slightly from year to year, but the message about always wearing helmets and wearing reflectors if you are out after dark remained the same. There was also the annual visit to the local high school to watch the older students during their final dress rehearsal of the annual musical they produced. Every year, Julio hoped he'd run into his brothers at the high school. Don't you see them enough at home? Lucas asked Julio. Sure, admitted Julio, but I've never seen them at the high school. Big deal. They'll look just the way they do at your house. Besides, if they don't try out for the musical, they can't be in it, Lucas pointed out. But Julio always hoped he'd get a glimpse of either Ramon or Nelson at the elementary school. Kids walked down the hallway toward the auditorium. This year, the high school musical was the pajama game. The audience was made up of young elementary school students and elderly residents of the local senior center. Julio overheard a couple of fourth grade teachers complaining to each other after the show. This was a colossal waste of time, said one, especially at the time of year, said the other. Julio realized that he probably hadn't learned anything new during the 2 hours he'd sat in the high school auditorium. But come to think of it, the word colossal might show up on the vocabulary part of the standardized test. And besides, attending the show had been a lot of fun. He'd walk up the aisle humming one of the melodies to himself. 7.5 cents, 7.5 cents. On the bus returning to the elementary school, Mrs. Schrelenberg told the students a bit about labor unions and workers on uniting to get higher wages. So come to think of it, Julio suddenly realized he had learned something new that day after all. One thing that happened every year was that school photographs were taken. Mrs. Schellenberg reminded her students on Friday, everyone please dress appropriate for your pictures on Monday. Our principal, Mr. Herbertson, suggests that boys will look their most handsome in a white shirt and tie. Girls, see that your hair is combed away from your face so we can really see you. Cricket raised her hand. What should girls wear? Oh, Cricket, said Mrs. Schellenberg with a sigh. It was a silly question, Julio thought. Cricket just loved to hear her own voice. This isn't the first time you've had your school photo taken, Mrs. Schellenberg pointed out. What did you wear last year? I wore my green velveteen dress, but it doesn't fit anymore. Whatever you wear will be fine, said Mrs. Schellenberg. Remember, in addition to your individual photograph, there will be a class portrait with everyone in it. It's a lovely souvenir of the grade, and you'll want to look your best. She smiled at her students. I have an album with a class portrait from every year of my teaching career. How many pictures do you have? Lucas called out. Julio knew that was his way of asking how many years Mrs. Schrelenberg had been teaching. It was also a way to figure out their teacher's age. 15 pictures would mean 15 years. You could add that to the age your teacher probably graduated from college, and you'd have an answer. It was sort of like one of the practice math questions. Mrs. Schrelenberg guessed what Lucas had in mind too. She answered him by saying, Why, Lucas, I have class pictures going all the way back to the time of the American Revolution. Even someone who wasn't good in social studies knew that Mrs. Schrelenberg was making a joke. On Monday morning, Julio arrived at school wearing his white shirt, a necktie, and a jacket that had formerly belonged to Nelson. He admired himself in the bathroom mirror at home and knew he looked sharp. His hair was slicked back with some of Ramon's special mousse, too. When he came into the classroom, he saw that most of his classmates looked pretty neat as well. They should have dressed up when they went to the high school, he thought now. Most of the men among their senior citizens had come wearing jackets and ties. Oh, Lucas, you didn't wear a white shirt, Cricket called out as Lucas removed his winter jacket. Sure enough, Lucas was wearing a black long-sleeved t-shirt with a fierce head of a dinosaur on it. Lucas shrugged. I forgot, he admitted. Lucas wasn't the only one. Peter Saunders, Alex Collins, Steve Greenfield, and Bobby Evans were also wearing t-shirts with and without pictures. Mrs. Schrelenberg shook her head when she saw them. This always happens when the school photo session takes place on Monday. If it was tomorrow, I could have reminded you just before you left for home. Oh well, so be it, she said. Julio had an idea. I could take off my shirt and tie and jacket and lend it to the other boys, he offered. Then what will you wear when you get your picture taken? Cricket wanted to know. Your underwear? Everyone giggled at the comment. No, silly, said Julio. We'll take turns. The photographer only does one picture at a time. After I pose for my picture, I could take my shirt off and Lucas could put it on. And after Lucas, Peter, and then Steve, Bobby, and Alex. We're all about the same size, more or less. That's a smart idea, said Zoe, smiling at Julio. It would be a good plan, admitted Mrs. Schellenberg, but I think the photographer takes all the girls' pictures and then all the boys'. There just won't be enough time for each boy to change into and out of your shirt. You'd have to be like Clark Kent, dressing rapidly to become Superman. And you know that the photographer keeps to a very tight schedule. He has to photograph every child in the school today. Why does he have to do all the girls and then all the boys? Julio asked. If he took a boy's picture and then a girl's, there'd be time for the next boy to put on my shirt. And then if the next person photographed was another girl, there'd be time for another boy to put on my shirt. Julio, I gave you A+ for common sense, said Mrs. Schellenberg, beaming at her student, and so that was exactly what was done for Class 4S. The photographer was told that for this class, he would have to alternate girls and boys as he took his picture. Julio stood in the assigned spot with the bright light shining on his face and gave a grin, even before the photographer could remind him to say cheese. As soon as the camera flashed, Julio moved aside from one of the girls. He quickly removed his jacket and shirt and slipped his necktie over his head without an actual untying it. Ramon had helped him at home, and he didn't think he could redo it by himself. He handed his clothing over to Peter. Eventually, everyone in the class had been photographed. Wait till my mom hears that my clothes got into so many pictures, Julio said, grinning. As for my class portrait, Mrs. Schellenberg arranged the boys in T-shirts to stand in the back row, half hidden by their classmates, who were more appropriately dressed. Julio had a spot right in front, standing tall and proud in his white shirt, necktie, and Nelson's old jacket. Say cheese, the photographer said once again. Julio thought it might be very boring to repeat the same thing over and over and over again all day long. And tomorrow the photographer would probably be at another school telling other students the same thing, say cheese. Gorgonzola, called out Lucas. Luckily, the photographer quickly snapped the shutter before everyone turned to ask Lucas the same question. What's that? Even Cricket didn't know what Gorgonzola was. Is that the type of dinosaur on your shirt? She asked him. It's a kind of cheese, said Lucas. The photographer didn't tell us what kind of cheese he wanted us to say. Gorgonzola, it sounds gross, said Alex. You should have said Swiss, suggested Connie Alp, or American. I like that the best. I like cheddar, another voice called out. Enough cheeses, said Mrs. Schellenberg as the class walked back to their room. You're making me hungry, and we still have an hour to go until lunchtime. I wonder what's for lunch at the cafeteria today, asked Bobby. I know, Julio told him. He always knew what they were serving because he looked forward to the school lunch every day. It's macaroni and cheese, he announced. Julio sighed. He was getting hungry. He wondered what Gorgonzola tasted like. He'd be willing to try it, but he hoped it wouldn't even turn up as one of their spelling words. Who in 4th grade would know something like that? Even Cricket would get it wrong. All right, that's the end of Chapter 8. Say cheese. Tomorrow, look forward to Chapter 9. Happy birthday, Julio. All right, stay safe.